Happy coding.
Hey there, and welcome to the next video in our series of Intro to Web Dev videos that we've been doing. Um, we've been through a journey. We've learned a lot. We've learned about HTML, we've learned about CSS, and we are diving into JavaScript. So JavaScript lets you make your code like sort of interactive and lets your page sort of respond to user input and output stuff to the page. So last week you learned about if statements, which lets you sort of make decisions in your code. And this week we are going to extend all of that. We're going to continue building on that foundation to learn about a new concept called for loops, which let you sort of do repeated work in your code, which is another like super common like foundational concept in computer science, in coding, in web development. So as always, like, I don't know, I don't like to lecture with a bunch of slides or, a bunch of, I guess it is a bunch of me talking, but, I like to see what I'm doing here. So I've got a glitch project up and running here, and I've got my index.html page and my resulting website over there on the right. I also have a script.js file here that I'm loading in the HTML, and right now it's just empty. Okay, so as a little bit of review, I think first, what I'm going to do is take a couple of concepts that we've used in the last couple weeks and just kind of add them to this page. So I'm going to modify a few things in my HTML. First off, I'm going to add an ID to this p tag. And I'm going to call it like output. I might just put like ... here for now because in a second I'm going to overwrite this in JavaScript. And then the other thing I want to do is have like an onload attribute here. So onload, I'll call this, I don't know, load maybe. Not super duper creative there, but what I'm telling the browser is when this content loads, when the body element loads, call the load function in JavaScript, which I have not defined yet. But I'm going to in a second. So if I go over to my script.js, I can define that function. So function load and curly braces. And in here, I could do a couple things. I could just do console.log here. This is a pretty common line of code just to sort of prove that everything is working. So let's see, if I open this up in my console, I see it's super tiny, and down there, I see here. And to make it just a little more interesting, maybe I'll actually use some of those concepts that we talked about a couple weeks ago, where I actually get a reference to my element. So I'm going to say like let output element equals document dot get element by ID, and I think I called it output. As you know, I always forget what my ID is, but I think that's probably right. And I can do like output element equals, I don't know, hello world, here I am, just to make sure that it's like actually what we're loading. And oh, I need output element. So again, I like making mistakes while you code is totally normal. So when I zoomed out and I looked here, I was like, wait a second, this doesn't say hello world, here I am. And that's because this isn't correct. I'm setting the output element itself equal to the string, and that's not how anything works. So I'm going to do inner text equals hello world, here I am. And now we see hello world, here I am. So that's what we learned a couple weeks ago. That's sort of DOM manipulation or interactive HTML, where you are writing JavaScript that gets references to the HTML itself, in this case, a reference to the output element, and then does stuff with it. In this case, sets the inner text of it. Last week, we also learned about if statements. So I can say something like, I don't know, let current time equals, and let's say it's, I don't know, around 7 p.m. right now. And I can say like if current time is greater than, I don't know, 5 p.m., then we can say something like, it's quitting time. It is quitting time. And that if statement will trigger because, 19 is greater than 17. If this was, I don't know, like 9 in the morning, then you're just going to get the dot, 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 because this if statement is just skipped over. So all of that is just sort of review of the stuff that we've learned about in the last couple weeks. And now we're going to kind of continue building on that. So the important thing to notice here is, like, I don't know, the way code works is that you read it line by line. And you get here, well, first off, maybe I should start in my index.html. So my index.html, when the browser loads this page, when it loads this index.html file, it goes through line by line. And it says, first off, I have an HTML page. Great, cool. Here's the HTML. Here's a head section, which is going to tell me like information about the page. I get information about like what to name the browser tab. You don't really see that in this view, but you know, if you open it up in a new window, you will. I also, it gets this line and then says, here's my CSS. Let's go load that file. That file right now is just empty. And then it says, okay, let me go load this script.js file that will like load in the JavaScript. And in this case, it just defines a function. It doesn't actually run the function yet. It just defines it. It says, okay, here's a function named load. Cool. I will remember that. And then it keeps going and it says body, and it says, okay, so here's the body element. This is where all the content's going to go. And when I finish loading this, I should remember to go call the load function, and we know what that is. So cool. Then it shows an H1, shows a P, and then it's done loading. So then it calls the load function. So just like line by line, just like that. And then in the load function, it just runs these lines like, you know, one at a time. It says, first, print something to the console. So that's down here somewhere. If I clear out my errors here, then it says, go get the output element with the ID of output, or get the, you know, the element with an output of an ID of output and store it in an output element variable. Then it creates a variable, and then it checks if that variable is greater than 17. If it is, it outputs some text. Otherwise, it doesn't. So this sort of conceptually is super important, that code runs line by line, and depending on what the line of code is, it does different stuff. So like, I don't know, remember that, because that's going to come back in a minute. Okay, so enough about review and if statements. I want to get rid of some of this. And let's say that I wanted to print, I don't know, 10 things. In fact, let me maybe change my HTML to make this like a UL. So I'm going to say this is a UL, and right now it just doesn't contain anything. And let's say I want to add some LIs. You know, there's a few ways I can do that. One, you know, I could just do it in the HTML, right? I could say li1, li2, li3. I might close this just because it's kind of distracting. And this is one way I could do it. I could, you know, write HTML just sort of statically in my page, but that will work for, you know, information that you already have like at the time of writing the HTML. But as you've seen in some of the JavaScript that we've seen so far, you don't always know ahead of time, right? So sometimes you want to write your content like in JavaScript itself. So if we wanted to do that, then I will jump over here and I might say something like output element dot inner text, and this is going to be a little new, but it's building off of concepts we've used before. Let's say I wanted to add a bunch of LIs to the inner text. Like I didn't just want to set it equal to a big old string. I wanted in multiple lines to like add multiple LIs. So I could say plus equals something like li1/li, and then I'm going to just sort of copy paste this code because it's going to be super tedious, but I could say 2 and then 3. And oh, so it's not inner text. I need inner HTML here. So what I just did is I looked over here and I was like, wait a second, that's not what I expected. I don't expect the actual like HTML tags to be in the page. I expect that to be, you know, rendered, and it's because I'm using inner text over here. So this needs to be inner HTML, I think. I never remember if it's capitalized or not, but let's find out. And yeah, okay. So here I am. I'm just adding strings to my inner HTML. I'm saying, hey, take whatever the inner HTML is, and add this. This line could be a little longer. This is what we talked about last week. But if you don't remember that, I could do it this way too, where I could say the inner HTML of the output element is whatever the inner HTML of the output element already is, plus, whatever I say here, in this case, just 1. But this line of code is super, super common. So for now, I'll just use the shortcut. I'll say plus equals. And this works, right? I could say 1, 2, 3, and here I am like writing JavaScript code because it, again, reads line by line and adds 1, adds 2, and adds 3. Like it's adding that HTML to the li tag or to the ul tag, and you get this rendered output. And I could keep going, right? I could do like 10 of these, right? But it would be pretty tedious. And chances are you've encountered something like this in the last couple of projects that we've done, where you might copy paste a line of code like a bunch of times and then change it in a bunch of places. And, it will work, but it is pretty tedious, which you've probably seen before. So what if there was a way to do this without copy pasting a bunch of things? Wouldn't that be nice? And spoiler alert, there is, and it's called a for loop. So let me get rid of some of this, all of it, most of it. And I'm just going to sort of dive into like the syntax of a for loop. And this is like brand new syntax that you haven't seen before. So I'm going to go pretty slow, and then I'm going to talk about like exactly what I'm typing. So to use a for loop, you need to do a few things. So first you use the keyword for, so FOR, and then you add an open parenthesis. And Glitch is nice enough to give you the closing parenthesis as well. So, remember that that's there. And then inside of these parentheses, you do 3 things. First, you create a variable, just like you would on like its own line. So you use the let keyword. Then you give it a name. This is often like index or I, sort of by convention, but you can name it whatever you want. Kind of depends on exactly what you're using for. For now, I'll say index, and then you set it equal to something. Usually, you set it equal to 0, just to start with. Like that's the starting default value. So you set it equal to 0, and then you use a semicolon, and then the next thing you give it is a Boolean expression, which looks a lot like a if statement. So I'm going to say index less than 10, and then another semicolon, and then you increment your variable. So you add something to your variable. So you can say something like index equals index plus something. So in this case, 1 maybe. And this will increase the index variable by 1 every time the loop goes. And you'll see what that means in a second. But this line of code is so common, like pretty similar to this line of code where like adding something to a variable is so common. Adding 1 to a variable is even more common. So this gets shortened to ++. This does the exact same thing as what I had before. It's just saying take index and add 1 to it. So reassign it to whatever the current value is +1. And I'll talk more about this in a minute. So those are the 3 things you give your sort of declaration of your for loop, this first line. It looks a little like a function, but it's not. It's like a statement. So then after the closing parenthesis, you give it an opening curly brace. And again, Glitch is nice enough to give you a closing curly brace. And I usually add like some white space here. JavaScript doesn't care about white space, so you can add as much as you want. And it just kind of makes it easier to read. And then inside of your for loop, you write the code that you want to execute multiple times. And in this case, what I want to do is output something to my output element. So I'm going to kind of steal this line of code. And yeah, I'll just actually steal that, straight up steal it. So I'll just copy it. And in here, what I'm doing is every time the for loop executes, I'll talk about that in a second, I am adding this line, this li, to my output element. So if I zoom out, let's see what happens. I see a bunch of 1s. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. That's because my for loop is repeating this line of code. And so to make it a little more interesting, what I might do is use that index variable. So instead of 1 here, I'm going to sort of use my string concatenation to actually add the numbers to it. So now over here, what I see in my UL, in my output, is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And the reason this is happening is because of my for loop. Notice that like I don't have 10 lines of code here. I have, 1 or maybe 3 if you count like all of them. So that is a for loop in a nutshell, but let me kind of go back and explain like what the heck just happened. So to do that, I might, so I mentioned earlier that JavaScript doesn't care about white space. So I might add some white space. It's only for me. This is usually not how you write a for loop, but I'm going to write it like this for now, because this sort of splits it up onto like each individual thing is on its own line. This still works. JavaScript doesn't care if you add new lines. So this just lets me sort of talk about it. So again, when your browser runs your code, it runs it line by line. And so when you get to the load function, first it prints out here, then it gets a reference to the output element, and then it gets to this for, this for loop, this for statement. And what your browser does when it encounters this is it reads these things. So sort of in order, the first thing it does is it creates this variable. It creates a variable named index, and it sets it equal to the value 0. You could set it equal to whatever you wanted, but we've set it equal to 0. Then it checks this Boolean expression. It very similar to an if statement. It says, is index less than 10? Well, 0 is less than 10, so yes. So it runs this line of code. It appends this string to the inner HTML of our output element, and it uses the index variable, which starts out as 0. So that's why you get this 0 up there. And then it reaches sort of this closing curly brace. And remember when you saw an if statement, when you reach the ending curly brace, the code kept running. It would run whatever was after your if statement. But with a for loop, what it does is it pops back to the top. And it says, okay, I'm actually back up here. And it skips this line. It doesn't create the variable every time, but it does run. Actually, I should say, like the first thing it does actually is it runs this line. So it actually runs the third thing. When you reach the end of your for loop, you run your incrementer. So now index is 1. When I reach the end of my for loop, index is 1. So then it jumps to the top and it says, is index less than 10? Well, 1 is less than 10. So I'm going to run this again. Now index is 1, which is why I get this. You reach the end, you jump back to the top, you run this incrementer. So now index is 2. Is 2 less than 10? Yes, it is. And so on and so forth. I'm not going to do all 10 because that'd be super boring, but that's sort of the logic that your browser is running through when it runs this code. Is it's repeating this for loop and checking this this Boolean expression every single time, and until eventually you reach a point where index is 9, so you print out 9. Then index increments, index turns to 10, and then you get here as is 10 less than 10? No, 10 is equal to 10. So then it's kind of like an if statement where it says, okay, never mind. If this is not true, then I'm going to jump out and I'm going to keep going. So if I had more code here, it would keep running that code, but for now we just kind of exit. So that is sort of the individual pieces of the for loop working together to have your computer sort of repeat a block of code. And you can have multiple lines of code in here as well. I could also do like console.log I, something like that. And I lost my console, but if I had that open, I didn't name it I. I is a common name. I called it index. So if I do that, here we go. We also see it printed to the console. So you can have more than one line of code in here. It's a block of code. You can put anything you want in there. Okay, so that is sort of for loops in a nutshell. You use them to repeat code, and you sort of do that by using the for keyword and then giving it those three things. You create a variable, you give it a Boolean expression, and then you increment the variable generally. So the next thing I want to talk about is the fact that, I don't know, like the indexing is generally zero based, and that doesn't really make sense right now, probably because nothing is stopping you from using like a 1 here. And that will work. So now my list starts at 1, and for certain purposes that might be exactly what you want. But it'll make a lot more sense when we get to arrays, why you normally start with a 0 here. But for now, just know that you can set this equal to pretty much anything. So I could set it equal to 2 if I wanted to. I could start at 2, and the pattern will start at 2 and then go from there. I can also change any of these. I could say, is this less than or equal to 10? And if I do that, now I see that 10. Oh, this is my face is hiding it. Let's move me. Ooh. The 10 is here over there. So because I said less than or equal here. If I say less than, then the 10 is not there. So it kind of depends on exactly where you want your for loop to start and end. That kind of changes where you will, like what you'll use there. Let me move my little face back, and sure. Okay. So, and also you can do anything you want here. So instead, let's say I wanted to start at 1 and end at, 100. And that will work fine. And that's kind of the magic of for loops is, I didn't have to write 100 lines of code, right? I just changed this little tiny part. I could do 1,000, I could do 10,000, I could do 1,000,000, and it would still work. I can also change this line of code. So I can say, instead of adding 1, maybe I want to add, 7 every time. And so now it starts at 1, add 7, add 7, add 7, add 7, until eventually it gets down to 99, and then it'll stop, because the next thing it reaches is 106, and 106 is not less than 100. So you'll put different things in here depending on what your goal is, but very often the way it'll look is this will start at 0, this will be some number, and this will be a 1 or just plus plus. So that's a pretty common pattern. Okay, so I think that's where I'll stop with for loops, because the real power of these, I think, is when you get to arrays, which is the very next video. So I will stop this video here, and I'll meet you over in that one. All right, well, until then, happy coding.